You might think pirates spent most of their time swinging from ropes, shouting "air," and swigging rum like it was a non-stop party. But their biggest enemy wasn't the Royal Navy or cursed treasure chests. It was something way more basic and terrifying: staying healthy without modern medicine. Yep, long before antibiotics and band-aids, pirates sailed the seas in the 1720s with infections, scurvy, and all sorts of nasty ailments breathing down their necks. But here's something history books don't tell you. Pirates had a bizarre, almost genius trick to extract medicine from their very own trusted supply of rum. And trust me, the solutions they came up with were as wild and unpredictable as a cannonball fight on deck. Let's rewind to the year 1720, in the thick of the golden age of piracy. Imagine a ship like the Queen Anne's Revenge, Blackbeard's infamous flagship, with a crew of about 200 men crammed into 63-gallon barrels of rationed water and rum. Pirates weren't just swilling grog to loosen their tongues or look intimidating. They needed every drop of that rum for survival. Why? Because clean drinking water on a ship was a luxury as rare as a calm day in a hurricane. Sea water was useless, too salty with about 3.5% salt content, enough to dehydrate a man in hours. Fresh water stored in barrels turned stale and rank within 24 to 48 hours, often tasting like pond scum mixed with socks. So pirates resorted to drinking rum diluted with whatever water they had, hoping the alcohol would kill off the nastiest germs. But here's the twist: pirates weren't just drowning their sorrows and infections in random drinks. They were trying to extract and harness medicinal properties from the rum itself. Why? Because rum, especially the one made in the Caribbean, contained more than just alcohol. It was soaked in sugars, spices, and a dash of whatever herbs the distiller happened to have. Pirates believed this combination had healing powers, and guess what? They weren't entirely wrong. Rum, with its roughly 40% alcohol by volume, acted as a crude antiseptic and painkiller on the high seas. The problem was, straight rum was too strong to drink neat all day, and just mixing it with stale water dulled its power. So pirates faced a conundrum: how to get the remedy out of rum without suffering the hangovers or wasting precious alcohol. Early attempts, spoiler alert, they didn't exactly cook up the next miracle drug on the first try. Some tried making simple tonics by mixing rum with vinegar or citrus juices, hoping the acidity would boost its medicinal effects. Bad idea. Really bad idea. Vinegar made the brew taste like sour swamp water and did nothing to kill off stubborn infections like the gangrene that plagued cut wounds. Others tried steeping medicinal herbs like sage and rosemary into the rum, thinking the spice might work as a magic cure. But here's the kicker: many herbs were scarce or spoiled after long sea voyages, turning these potions into murky, often moldy messes. Let's just say it wasn't pretty, and more than one pirate lost teeth or worse after drinking these disastrous concoctions. One genius approach involved using specially prepared oak chips. Pirates discovered that adding charred oak slices, yes, the same kind of wood used to age their rum, helped pull out compounds that improved the flavor and, surprisingly, the antimicrobial properties of their medicinal brew. But the problem was convincing a superstitious crew that this grimy, smoky liquid wasn't just another vile drink. Pirate crews, notorious for their short tempers and even shorter attention spans, were skeptical. The first volunteer to drink the oak-infused rum tonic ended up looking green as a parrot from the taste alone. Still, those who survived swore it sped up wound healing and stopped fevers faster than any simple rum mix. The real genius here was accidental. Pirates didn't know it, but the charcoal in oak binds with tannins and phenolic compounds that actually help neutralize toxins and bacteria, kind of like the 17th century version of activated charcoal tablets. Now, if you think pirates were just randomly experimenting, think again. Captain Bartholomew Roberts, one of the most successful pirates of his era, reportedly kept detailed logs of these rum medicine experiments. He even mandated that every crew member undergo a tonic trial whenever fever or infection broke out. His ship carried around 50 gallons of rum reserved specifically for this purpose, kept separate from drinking supplies. Roberts understood the stakes. A man down with scurvy or infected wounds could turn a fight into a rout. By rationing this medicinal rum, which was often double distilled and sometimes infused with lime or other citrus juices rich in vitamin C. He saw a reported 70% effectiveness in keeping his crew alive through long voyages. But you can probably guess how that ended. The issue was dosage and consistency. Without scales or measuring tools, some pirates accidentally consumed too much medicinal rum and ended up incapacitated, not from sickness, but from drunkenness. Others drank too little and still suffered scurvy or festering wounds. This inconsistency led to all sorts of bizarre behaviors and superstitions around the doctor's rum. Some believed drinking the nurse's share brought bad luck. Others claimed it gave visions or even enhanced fighting prowess, making it a prized and fiercely guarded resource on board. Now, if we're talking about extracting medicine, you're probably wondering, how did pirates actually get the medicine out of rum? Here's where it gets interesting. Instead of just drinking it straight, some pirate surgeons developed a rudimentary evaporation technique. Think of it like a pirate's version of distillation, but done on a rum-spiked rag. They would soak cloth strips in rum, then let the alcohol evaporate slowly in the salty sea air, effectively concentrating the medicinal ingredients left behind in a sticky residue. This residue was then applied directly onto wounds as a sort of antiseptic poultice. It sounds gross when you put it like that, sticky cloth soaked in old alcohol, but it was far better than nothing because it avoided the problem of excess alcohol consumption internally while still delivering benefits externally. One famous documented case is that of the pirate surgeon James Smith aboard the ship Ranger, circa 1722. Smith was notorious for his eccentric methods, and once managed to save the captain's leg from amputation using this rum residue poultice, combined with crushed ginger root, an early form of anti-inflammatory treatment. The captain reportedly said the poultice burned like the devil but healed like an angel, which, let's be honest, is probably the best medical review you'll ever hear from a swashbuckler. But let's not pretend this was medical nirvana. Pirates had no clue about microbes or germs. What worked was mostly trial and error combined with luck. Spoiled rum, damp cloths, and questionable herbs sometimes made things worse. There are records of ridiculous side effects, like pirate crews breaking out in rashes or swelling from herbal infusions thought to be cures. Because nothing says, "I'm a terrifying buccaneer," like a blubbering mess who looks like he faced a kraken and lost, but was actually just allergic to the latest batch of medicinal rum. It's also worth mentioning that rum itself played a critical role as a transport medium for medicine. Unlike water, alcohol could keep herbs and spices from rotting or growing bacteria for longer periods, crucial for months-long voyages. So when pirates made these medicinal rum tinctures, they essentially created a floating pharmacy with a shelf life longer than any other remedy available at the time. Imagine trying to keep your vitamin C fresh for 3 to 6 months at sea when lemons and limes were rare luxuries. Rum with infused citrus peel actually delivered small doses to the crew all day long, significantly reducing cases of scurvy. And speaking of scurvy, here's a fun fact. The phrase "limey" wasn't just an insult hurled at British sailors by their pirate foes. Pirates sometimes equated the lime stuff mixed into rum with some kind of magical health potion. Some pirates insisted that if you didn't have citrus-infused rum on board, you might as well give up the whole pirate life and become a landlubber. This citrus rum mix was about as close as you could get to a vitamin pill for humans who thought vitamin was just a fancy word for good grog. To make these remedies truly effective, pirates sometimes aged their medicinal rum longer than their drinking rum, allowing the flavors and supposed healing properties to meld over weeks. This was the 17th century version of refrigerated medicine cabinets. You can't just whip up a tincture and expect magic. So pirate ships often allocated storage space like a mini apothecary and a booze cellar combined. Captain Henry Morgan, who famously raided Panama in the late 1600s, was known to keep his medical rum barrel under lock and key, only opening it when illness struck, emphasizing that for pirates, medicine and poison were only a thin line apart. So to sum up, pirates faced a brutal truth. The ocean was full of hazards. Boarding enemy ships was one danger, but getting sick with no doctor, no antibiotics, and barely drinkable water was quietly wrecking more crews than cannonballs ever could. Their answer was to use rum not just as a drink, but as a base for extracting and delivering medicine, turning that grog into something like a floating pharmacy. They fumbled with toxic mixtures, burned their tongues with poultices, and endured some pretty nasty side effects. But in the end, they created a primitive but surprisingly effective system that helped keep pirate crews alive to fight another day. And all this from a drink you probably thought was just for making you say, yo ho ho at parties. Now, isn't piracy suddenly sounding a bit smarter, if a little grosser, than you expected? Alright, so you remember how pirates were basically stuck with rusty barrels of rum, nasty water, and a growing collection of festering wounds the size of cannonballs. Well, as if life weren't already a never-ending bad day, they still needed to get creative because the rum itself, as magical as it sounded, wasn't quite the wonder cure they hoped for. Here's where things really get bonkers and brilliant in pirate medicine history. It turns out the rum's alcohol content wasn't enough on its own. Pirates figured out they had to upgrade their grog game using a few tricks that would make even modern bartenders raise an eyebrow. One of the biggest breakthroughs involved the mysterious use of tree bark. Think of it like the pirate version of your local herbalist. Except nobody exactly knew what they were doing and half the batch looked like swamp water. The problem? Pirates battling infections and scurvy had barely enough herbs, and those that survived months at sea were little more than brittle husks of what they once were. So a dozen or so would smuggle fresh bark from tropical trees they believed held healing qualities. They soaked this bark directly in rum, sometimes for weeks, hoping the alcohol would leach out natural compounds that might fight infection, reduce inflammation, or boost energy. Spoiler alert, some of these barks turned out to be about as medicinal as chewing on rope. Some mixtures led to violent stomach pains, others to crippling rashes. Let's just say the crew's bathroom breaks became legendary in their own right, as stories of green-hot lava, pain, and bum explosions circulated faster than gossip about buried treasures. Bad idea, really bad idea. But pirates don't give up just because their butts are on fire. Here's where it gets interesting. Through trial and error, they discovered that charred bark, the same stuff they used to age rum barrels, had antimicrobial effects far superior to raw bark. Charcoal had the power to trap impurities and toxins, kind of like a 17th century Brita filter, but way more hardcore. Pirates didn't know about activated charcoal or phenolic compounds, but they stumbled upon the fact that this smoky, gritty bark improved internal healing when soaked in alcohol and consumed sparingly. It turned their rum from just a means to dull pain into a weapon against gangrene and fever. This method boosted survival rates remarkably. Records from pirate logs mention crews staying healthier for weeks longer than usual, with infection-related deaths dropping by nearly 50%. Captain Benjamin Hornigold reportedly won a bloody skirmish because his crew was healthier enough to fight rather than lie rotting below decks. Still, the taste, pretty brutal. Think of licking the ashes off a campfire after a rainstorm, but worse. The first volunteers usually spit out the foul brew or ended up green-faced and vomiting. But pirates are nothing if not stubborn, and those brave, or desperate, enough to endure often swore by it. More than one pirate joked that if they survived drinking the charred bark rum tonic, they could survive a Kraken attack and live to tell the tale. Pretty brave for a bunch of sea dogs who also insisted on dressing like drunken parrots. Next up was the ingenious, if somewhat repulsive, method of rum-impregnated claws. We touched on it before, but the details are worth repeating because it's one of those bizarre medical hacks that actually worked better than anything else at the time. Pirates didn't have wound dressings like our cotton pads and antibacterials. They had to get creative with whatever was on the ship. So, the rum-soaked rag poultice became a sort of antiseptic ninja. The idea was simple. Soak a strip of linen in rum, let most of the alcohol evaporate under the salty breeze, and then press the sticky, concentrate residue directly on cuts, burns, or insect bites. This way, they bypass the problem of alcohol poisoning from drinking too much rum, while still using its antiseptic properties exactly where they were needed. The problem was, and try not to cringe too hard here, the process sometimes created a broth for marine bacteria or mold if the cloths weren't kept dry between uses. This led to pirate surgeons frantically swatting black fuzzy things off their medical supplies and muttering curses under their breath. Talk about ruining your fearsome reputation when your nurse's latest medicine causes more outbreaks of skin infections than sword fights. Early attempts in the 1720s aboard the ship Revenge were notorious for accidental reinfections. 70% of wounds treated this way initially got worse before they got better. You can probably guess how that ended. More screaming, more amputations, and some poor sailor who lost his ear to what he called the devil's damp rag. But the real genius was in layering treatments. Surgeon James Smith, the eccentric pirate Doc mentioned earlier, combined these rum poultices with locally sourced anti-inflammatory spices like ginger and cloves. The spices were known back in port towns for fighting pain and reducing swelling, but at sea, fresh ingredients were rare. So Smith crushed dried ginger roots and mixed them with the rum poultice to create a compound that helped reduce tissue swelling and stopped infections from spreading faster. This combo was so effective that Captain Edward Teach, the notorious Blackbeard, swore by it after suffering a nasty leg wound near the Caribbean in 1723. According to legend, Teach said the poultice burned worse than a cannon blast but saved my leg from the surgeon's blade, which, coming from a pirate king who liked to pretend he was immortal, speaks volumes. The obvious downside: it smelled like bad stew left to fester in the sun. More than one recruit nearly deserted ship after smelling these healing rags, thinking pirates were trying to poison each other before battle. It's basically the 17th century version of rubbing garlic under your nose to survive vampire season, but with more mold. Of course, no discussion of pirate rum medicine would be complete without mentioning the legendary citrus infusion method, because if you didn't have that, you were basically signing up for a slow, scurvy-led death. Pirates figured out early on that mixing lime or lemon juice into their rum, when they could get hold of it, helped stave off scurvy, caused by a vitamin C deficiency. The problem was fresh citrus fruit spoiled within days of leaving port, and pirate ships on months-long voyages couldn't stockpile limes like a Caribbean grocery store. Their solution: they preserved citrus peel in rum, sometimes crushing the peel to extract tiny amounts of vitamin C while the alcohol kept everything from rotting. This was far from a perfect vitamin pill, but it was enough to keep men from developing the horrible scurvy symptoms: bleeding gums, swollen joints, and teeth falling out by the dozen, that made pirates less fearsome, buccaneers and more groaning jellyfish. Here's a fun fact and a bit of irony. British sailors earned the nickname limeys because the Royal Navy forced their crews to drink lime juice, not because they were particularly fond of sour drinks. Pirates sort of adopted this in reverse, using lime-infused rum as a prized medicinal elixir. And some even believed the grog itself inherited the citrus magic, much like a potion in a fantasy novel. In fact, Captain Henry Morgan reportedly hid his lime-infused medicinal rum on his flagship just like treasure, only granting access when scurvy or malaria struck the crew hard. He claimed it was worth more than gold for keeping his men alive during the grueling siege of Panama in 1671. Pretty fancy for a bunch of outlaws who supposedly cared only about treasure and rum. Now, here's where things get a bit wilder. Pirates knew the value of aging. They found that storing their medicinal rum in barrels charred with oak and left to mellow over several months not only improved the taste, which was crucial if you wanted anyone to actually drink it, but enhanced its healing powers. This aging process boosted the rum's antioxidant properties, breaking down harsh fusel oils that otherwise made you feel like your throat had been scraped by a rusty sword. Aging created tiny molecules known as esters that make spirits smoother, but these same chemicals also gave the rum better antiseptic qualities. Imagine it like their version of a refrigerated medicine cabinet, only with the smell of a pirate's socks. Captain Roberts took this aging so seriously, he demanded the medicinal rum be stored separately from the drinking rum and kept locked away, issuing doses only under his strict supervision like a grumpy doctor who also happened to wield a cutlass. But with all these clever methods, the underlying problem never fully went away. Measurement was a nightmare. Without scales, timers, or even reliable bottles, pirates often guessed their doses. One pirate log from the ship Witta reports cases where half the crew drank more medicine than they could handle, leading to midnight brawls, hallucinations, and even temporary blindness, none of which helped morale or actually curing the sick. Others tried to ration the rum tonic evenly, but ended up mixing batches that varied wildly, in strength making the medicine feel more like a cruel lottery than actual health care. Talk about ruining your fearsome reputation when half your crew is too lit to fight, and the other half is too sick to care. Still, despite all the mess and madness, these makeshift remedies actually prolonged pirate careers. Whether it was the oak-charred bark infusion, rum-soaked poultices, or the humble lime peel tincture, pirates turned what could have been immediate death sentences into time buys weeks, sometimes months, to survive infections, scurvy, and even battle wounds. You might think pirates spent most of their days shouting "yo ho ho" and drinking themselves silly, but in reality, their survival depended on these crude but ingenious rum medicines more than muskets or swords. So next time you raise a glass, remember that you're not just toasting to good times, you're tipping your hat to centuries of drunken medical experimentation and stubborn sea survival. Because in the wild, sweaty, infected world of pirates, medicine wasn't found in fancy labs or expensive potions. It was distilled in barrels, soaked into charred bark, and sloshed into wounds with a bitter sip of rum. And honestly, that's probably the most pirate thing you could imagine.